We have an amazing panel coming up here on Hempposium. It's called The Brave New World, Medical Research and Emerging Treatments. We've got Dr. David Bearman, Joel Stanley, Marcy Cooper, Jake Felize, Dr. Michelle Sexton, and Sue, are you on that panel as well? And Dr. Sue Sicily. So how great to have these amazing folks. And I just want you guys to know, Hempfest is free to attend, but is not free to put on. Everyone who comes here and who speaks on these panels pays for their own way. No one's paid to be here. My name's Philippe Lucas. I come down here every year from Vancouver Island. I'm the VP of Patient Research and Services for Tilray. We're a federally authorized medical cannabis production facility in Nanaimo, BC. We're currently doing a study of medical cannabis and post-traumatic stress disorder in cooperation with the University of British Columbia. It's going to be the biggest clinical trial of cannabis in Canada in the last 30 years. It's been a really exciting project. Every year I get to come down here and hang out with you amazing hempsters so that we can talk about our personal rights and freedom, talk about what's going well in terms of cannabis reform, talk about where we need to put more efforts in. And right now I'm so happy to have these amazing panelists, Marcy Cooper, Dr. Jake Felize, Michelle Sexton, David Bearman, and Joel Stanley coming up. And as they make their way to the stage, I want to give away a bit of stuff for you guys. So I've got some amazing gifts that have been given to me by Leafly and also by Raw. So I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions. Whoever gets the answers to the questions will get a handful of prizes. So the first question I've got is, and I see a few faces that are familiar to me down here in the audience. I know there's some folks who are going to get some of these, but who was the Israeli researcher who first isolated a cannabinoid? I got a hand up. Raphael Meshulam, come on up and get a prize. Get a handful of prizes. Right on. We got some Leafly. How you doing? Good to see you, Al. Right on. That is a two-part question. What was the first cannabinoid that he isolated? Who could tell me what the first cannabinoid is that Dr. Raphael isolated over 40 years ago today? What was the first cannabinoid, Dr. Raphael Meshulam? No takers? It was not THC. What was the first cannabinoid Dr. Raphael Meshulam isolated over 40 years ago? It starts with a C. CBD. We got a winner. Come on up, and we'll get you some swag from some of our sponsors here. Fantastic. No problem. I got one more question. We'll head to the panel. The first written documentation of cannabis as a medicine was by one of the founders of traditional Chinese medicine. If you can name the doctor or the journal in which he was cited, I don't know. You guys might know it. You got a bit of a TCM background. The first written mention of cannabis as a medicine. I will take The Emperor's Classic, it is. It's known as the Pensao Qing, written by the Emperor Shen Nung at the time. And you get your prizes. Right on. I should have known that someone up here would know it. All right. Let's get this thing going. We have some of North America's really top cannabis doctors, cannabis researchers here. I'm going to ask them all to do a brief introduction. If you could tell us a bit about yourself in a minute or less, and then we'll go on and find out what's going on in all of your worlds, what's going on in cannabis research. So, Joel, let's start it with you, man.
Sure. My name is Joel Stanley. I'm one of 6 brothers in Colorado that developed a high cannabidiol product known as Charlotte's Web. It's been featured in several documentaries. It's been found to be very effective, specifically for many clients or patients with severe intractable epilepsy. And I think our work there is where we're most notable. It's an honor to be in the industry, honor to be here. Thank Hempfest for having us today, and I'm excited to see what comes of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to have you here, Joel. Dr. David Bearman's been doing this a long time. David, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, what you're working on right now?
Yeah. About 2 weeks ago, I just came out with my new book, Drugs Are Not the Devil's Tool, How greed and discrimination led to a dysfunctional drug policy and how to fix it. And obviously the people here are the people that are very much involved in fixing it. This has been a really exciting year for me. I've been to Australia twice. They're going to beat us in terms of having national legalization of medical cannabis. The Prime Minister of the country is in favor of that. There's a physician who is a senator in the federal government. He's the head of the Green Party. He's written the legislation. He has co-sponsors from the two major political parties in Australia. This is a worldwide phenomenon. I think the one thing that we need to be careful about is not to not handle our success right. The prohibitionists still are spouting their lies. What we need to do is to do the kind of research that Dr. Sicily and that Mr. Lucas is doing, and that's pretty much what I'm involved with. The last thing I wanted to mention is I'm the Executive Vice President of the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine, and what we want to do is to marginalize those physicians that are practicing minimalist medicine when it comes to making recommendations for the medicinal use of cannabis. If people want to use recreational cannabis, that's all well and good. They shouldn't have to manufacture bogus medical problems. There are plenty of people who have real medical problems that benefit from cannabis.
Thanks a lot, David. Great to hear all the good work that you're doing. Dr. Michelle Sexton's been at this for a long time as well, getting involved in a lot of the rules, regulations, and some of the standards that we're setting for how cannabis can be grown, produced, and what makes basically the difference between recreational and medical cannabis as well. Michelle, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on these days?
Thanks, Felize. Hello?
Yeah, be sure and speak close to the mic if you would, folks.
Do you have to turn it on? Hello? Okay. Is this one on? I'm Michelle Sexton, and I'm a naturopathic doctor. I studied here in Seattle at Bastyr University. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship in the pharmacology of cannabinoids at the University of Washington. And as I came out of that, naturopaths had just been enabled to write recommendations here in Washington. And so my clinical practice became somewhat specialized. And I was also doing analysis of cannabis because I was very curious about what people were using medically and what the constituents were. So I've had a really unique and fun time putting all these pieces together about how the medicine works, what it's composed of, and how patients interact with the medicine. So a bit of also clinical research, and continue to just be amazed and honored to see people's lives changed by cannabis.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We'll look forward to benefiting from your knowledge and experience on this panel as well. Our next speaker is Dr. Jake Felize. Jake's been at this for some time now, has been really groundbreaking, both in terms of looking at therapeutic applications, but also as an advocate as well. So do you want to tell us a little bit what you're working on?
Yes, thank you all for coming. It's great to have so much interest in this topic medically. One of my main areas of interest with cannabis is cannabis topicals, lotions, skins, and oils that are lotions, creams, and oils that are applied to the skin. I'm also very interested in synergistic aspects of botanical medicine, how certain chemicals in cannabis can work together to make the medicine more powerful, as well as synergy between other plants that are non-cannabis related plants and how those might affect and benefit patients. And I think also another area that I find fascinating and look forward to future research on are cannabis's positive interactions with pharmaceutical medications. For example, in the case of opiate-based pain medications, cannabis can help reduce opiate tolerance while at the same time making them work better, so it doesn't necessarily have to be an either-or. And also with NSAID medications, which are things like Advil, ibuprofen, smoked cannabis. There are studies now showing that smoked cannabis actually protects the stomach lining of patients who are taking some of these pain medications on a regular basis. So I'm very interested in all of that. And I personally have a philosophy of the whole plant use. I believe that the whole of the plant is greater than the sum of its parts. And clinically, I focus a lot on pain. I'm very fascinated with the kind of a shift in focus of the nervous system when it's dealing with pain in regards to cannabis. So yes, cannabis has anti-inflammatory properties, it has pain-relieving properties, but it also changes the way our mind thinks about pain and how patients experience pain. So I see that as also an area where I have quite a bit of interest. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks a lot, Jake. Thanks for being here. Dr. Sue Sisley is heading up one of the biggest clinical trials of medical cannabis in the U.S. and certainly in a few decades. So it's great to have you here, Sue. Do you want to tell us little bit about the PTSD study that you're doing and other work that you're doing in terms of research right now?
You bet. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm the site principal investigator in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have an FDA-approved trial looking at 4 different strains of smoked marijuana for military veterans with treatment-resistant PTSD. And many of you have been following our saga. We're so grateful for all the dedicated advocates of marijuana research who've been, following this whole odyssey we've been on. If you saw on Weeds 3 with the Dr. Gupta CNN documentary, covered our story very in depth and showed this whole soap opera of us getting terminated from the University of Arizona College of Medicine, not being able to find a home with any university or hospital. It's been a really tough environment, and there's literally a war on science, but not all science. If you want to study the harmful side effects of marijuana or the addiction potential of marijuana, you have no problem getting green-lighted by the federal government. But if you dare say you want to study efficacy of marijuana, you get put into a permanent review process where you generally never emerge. And if it wasn't for an incredible support of the veterans' activism around the country, who helped us kick down the doors of the government, where we're finally at a place with this study where we're getting ready to implement. Hopefully in the next few months we'll be starting to screen veteran patients, and we'll need all of your help to get patient referrals. And I'm excited to talk with you more, but I think the important message here is the U.S. government has been systematically impeding marijuana efficacy research in this country for decades, and now it's time to end the final barrier to marijuana research, which is the DEA NIDA monopoly. The fact that all of us have to purchase marijuana study drug from the National Institute on Drug Abuse is an abomination. That monopoly needs to end immediately. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I'm going to lead off a couple of questions. We're going to leave lots of times for questions in the audience as well, but one of the first things I want to talk to you about with this illustrious panel is CBD. I think that, Joel, you and your family, the success you guys have had with Charlotte's Web, as well as a number of other folks here, including Sue and others who've done research with CBD or looking to do research with CBD, I don't think that there's a lot of doubt anymore that it can be really effective in the treatment of childhood seizure disorder, Dravet syndrome, etc. But on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of kind of almost outlandish claims being made about the theoretic potential of CBD. So I want to separate the truth from fiction. We know that it's working with kids with a seizure disorder, but with adult use, is it all hype? What do you guys think is the potential of CBD? What's real? What's fiction right now in terms of the future of CBD?
Yeah, I think our stories, that's a great question and something great to point out. People need to know and understand that whether it's CBD, THC, some variation, any given product, one person may respond really well, amazingly, for XYZ disease state or medical condition, and another person with the exact same medical condition may not respond at all. And we've seen both cases, certainly. While we've seen great success in many people with CBD, both pediatric and adults, for epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, even Parkinson's, any type of real neurological disorder, we're starting to collect data that suggests that it's very efficacious, but it isn't every time. And so, one of the disservices that has been done to us, our potential patients and clients and the entire industry, is that the media has highlighted those success stories only oftentimes. And so a lot of people get it built up in their minds that this is going to be a miracle thing for them when they move to Colorado or move to California, move to Washington to seek these treatments. It's kind of a sad thing when someone uproots their entire life, moves, and then it doesn't work for them. Even though it, may work for a significant number, it doesn't always work, and that is something that's very important to point out.
Well, thank you so much for pointing that out, because I think that particularly when you have parents who are leveling all of their hopes on this potential treatment, I think it's fair to let them know that, like any treatment, we're going to have people who respond positively and some that don't. This isn't a cure-all. It's not a panacea, and we got to realize that as well. Anyone else want to talk a little bit about CBD and the potential, David?
Well, I really want to go off on somewhat of a tangent. As Mr. Stanley mentioned...
You got a mic? Can we get a mic on there?
It might be turned off. Here.
Yep. Sorry, go ahead, David.
All right.
David, try.
All right. As Mr. Stanley mentioned, the media rarely gets it right. And as Dr. Sicily mentioned, the government never gets it right. And the prohibitionists have seized on the fact that CBD is non-euphoric. And as we all know, there's nothing wrong with a little euphoria. And the idea that CBD is the magic bullet in terms of seizures is not right. In 1947, we had the first modern research on cannabis, and it was tincture of cannabis. And I'm pretty sure that it had a low amount of THC, maybe 4 or 5%, and probably a little bit higher amount of CBD, maybe 0.5%. And it was very effective with 7 children who had cerebral palsy and had intractable seizures. 5 of the 7 stopped having them. And they suggested that it would be a good idea to do more research. And lo and behold, 57 years later, we did do more research. And I think that that's what needs to be done. And this love affair with CBD ignores what Dr. Felize talked about in terms of the entourage effect, the whole plant. CBD is an important cannabinoid, but there are 60 or 70 other cannabinoids, and there's the effect of the terpenes, and we need to be very careful that the neo-prohibitionists don't take CBD and somehow beat us over the head with something that's very good and turn it into something that is used to subvert whole plant medicine.
Thank you very much, David. Jake, did you want to add something? I'm a little bit worried about these CBD-only laws as well. It seems to be missing the point, and a way for prohibitionists to suggest they're helping people without actually striking down the war on drugs.
Well, yeah, and that... Are we live here? Okay, good. I think that for me, one of the things with CBD is that there's some confusion in the marketplace about CBD products, and specifically what high CBD products mean. There are CBD products that are derived from whole plant sources. So basically the CBD is pulled from the whole plant, and there are other products where the CBD is isolated so that it doesn't come from the whole plants, and those isolated products do not have, we know now from our very recent study in the Journal of Pharmacology and Pharmacy, there was a study in Israel looking at the dose response curves of whole plant CBD versus single molecule CBD, and what we found is that the whole plant is vastly superior, and part of the reason for that is because of the dosage response curve. And it is very difficult to titrate and get the dose of single molecule CBD to be in an effective range. We have a much better effect when we use whole plant. This is supported to a large degree in the literature of pain, where there is a synergy between THC and CBD. Starting in the early 70s is the first time I'm aware of that we've had a combination effect where it's shown that CBD plus THC gives 2 to 4 times the pain relief than just either of the 2 molecules separately and alone. And then Philippe's other point was an economic one. I think that there is a lot of, shall we say, dubious... The CBD products should be a lot more affordable than they are right now, especially for folks with cancer, some of whom are choosing to do larger doses. I just don't see how 100 milligrams of THC in a topical justifies a $50 price tag. For some of my patients, I would like for them to be using about half of that on any given day. there's no reason that it needs to be that expensive. Cannabis is a weed. It should be affordable for patients.
Thank you very much, Jake. I know that Sue wants to add a little something to this. I know that as part of your study, Sue, you guys are comparing high THC, but also THC, CBD in combination. So what are you hoping to find? And what's brought you there?
Yeah, I wanted to mention that we're studying 2 different strains of CBD-rich marijuana. And that's the beauty of a randomized controlled trial, is that hopefully we'll be able to collect some objective data on how these veterans will respond. But our hypothesis was that we believed that the 2 CBD-rich strains would perform better and would suppress PTSD more. But the truth is, I think there was some data recently from ICRS showing that the high THC phenotypes of marijuana were best for PTSD. So, and that's what we hear from veterans, that they prefer high THC. So this is the importance of getting this study implemented finally, because we desperately need objective data to answer these questions, data that is hopefully free from human bias and will be able to enlighten us.
Thank you very much, Sue. I think that's great to know, and I think a lot of people are excited about this, but it's good to clarify and look through the fog. Talking about the fog, we've just talked about CBD. I want to talk a bit about some of the minor cannabinoids out there as well that are showing great promise right now, and see if you guys have any thoughts or opinions as to what kind of research or what kind of therapeutic potential you guys are seeing for THCV, CBG, CBC, all of which seem to have these kind of wide-ranging applications, but we typically only see in very small proportions in the plant itself. Anyone want to take that on? Yeah, go ahead, Joel. Kick us off, and then we'll go to Michelle.
I'll speak to one cannabinoid specifically that we've seen work really well for some of our non-responders to CBD. So we have a lot of these families, someone's not responding well to CBD, but they may still be dealing with a pediatric and they would like to keep it non-psychoactive. A lot of people don't understand that a lot of the other cannabinoids, really almost all of the cannabinoids, are non-psychotropic. And one of them we've seen is really the same thing as THC. It's just a biological precursor to THC, and that's a THC acid, THCA. It's a little bit more difficult to make. It's not quite as stable. So there are a little bit of issues on the market as far as keeping these types of products viable and available. But we've seen THCA work significantly in some of the same patient population we've seen in Colorado that has been using CBD or Charlotte's Web, as you've seen in the stories.
Now, just a quick follow-up question before we go to Michelle. I've seen THCA. Of course, we all know that THCA is the acid form of the plant. It's what's found in raw cannabis before you heat it or convert it through smoking or otherwise. I've also seen it crystallize, which look quite beautiful as well. So what are your experiences with proper sources of THCA? Are people juicing? Are they finding it through crystallization or otherwise?
I think you can find it several different ways. The way that we prefer to do it, the way that I've found that it's the most stable, and we're actually still doing ongoing stability studies tests. So you basically set something aside or set it under certain conditions. Our quality control team does a great job doing that. But what we found is you bring it to an oil first, and then you suspend it in a carrier and just keep it cool, keep it out of UV light, and in general, it's going to keep for a decent period of time. The thing that I worry about juices, I think that they're great, but the availability of it and the reproducibility of it just isn't there yet. It's not that it can't be in the future, it just isn't there yet. And so we break it down to an oil, and part of the problem with that is you have to have some significant investment in distillation technology, vacuum technology, things like that. But it's not impossible. It's actually not terribly difficult to do. And I think that the industry is really, hopefully starting to look at it more, and we're going to see more of those products available that are that have quality control and consistency.
Excellent. Thanks, Joel. Michelle, do you want to add something to our discussion on THCA or some of the other minor cannabinoids?
Test. I don't know if this is going to work.
Guys? Mike?
Test.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, I just wanted to say just a bit about biodiversity, because that's really what Philippe is talking about, and that's what we're also talking about when we talk about CBD. And so there's a little bit of research from pharmacology, animal models on other isolated cannabinoids. They're a big class, but what ends up at the end of the plant life is a relatively small number typically. But we have selected these mutant THC producers for so long that, we've really limited maybe the full benefit of the plant. And this is what may be happening. There's something that's going on right now at the federal level called the CARES Act. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. And it may represent a move toward, things changing. But again, it's going to select for only these high CBD producing plants. And I was asking Joel earlier if he knew, if you may see a website saying, oh, here's why the CARES Act is so great. But if you go read the actual CARES Act, in the end, it's going to create another government monopoly on growing. They're talking about allowing 6 licenses. And we already know that in the Federal Register about a year ago, they issued a notice for license to grow. I think what they wanted to do was start growing the CBD-rich plant varieties, but it's all bogus because they just give that license back to the University of Mississippi. Yeah. And so this is one way that research is being stifled. But we really need biodiversity. And so we need a lot of people growing cannabis. And we need people saving the male population because the males are carrying the genetics. This is Mary John. And so we can't forget about the guys. We need these guys, because right now we're stuck with the genetics we've got when we're just cloning mother after mother after mother. We need seed. And so, to bring all the cannabinoids back and to have the potential of the whole plant again as it existed in nature as a food for our ancestors, we need people, normal, common backyard growers growing and breeding males and females together.
Sounds pretty revolutionary to me. I don't know, Michelle. Sue, do you want to add something to that?
I want to add that Dr. El Soli, he's the head of the University of Mississippi facility that grows for NIDA. He just announced that he's isolated the 138th phytocannabinoid. So the notion that what everybody's talking about here, this plant is so phenomenally complex. But the fact is, the hypocrisy of NIDA, that NIDA refuses to submit their drug master file to the public. So we're buying marijuana from them within the next few months, but the only information we get about this study drug is what is the ratio of THC to CBD. We won't know anything else about the environment that it's grown in, the various other cannabinoids, the terpene profile. Nothing is distributed. There's no transparency with the public, yet they accept millions and millions of taxpayer dollars. I think this is an outrage that we all should be angry about and demand this information. If anyone here is a lawyer and wants to submit a FOIA request to obtain that, we would join you in that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I just want to thank you. Here. I just want to add that there isn't a single drug you'd research or do clinical trials in the U.S. without a DMF or a drug master file. If you're doing research on aspirin, you get a drug master file. You're doing research on opiates, you get a drug master file from the manufacturer. This is something that needs to happen in every other case, and the government's exempting itself from that responsibility. Maybe that's a good time to go back to you for a minute, Sue, and see how your current challenges are in getting access to research-grade cannabis in the U.S. Your study has been ready to go for quite some time. My understanding is that right now you guys are waiting up a bit on NIDA to finally get some CBD plants going and to make available what you guys are requesting. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, apparently they've never grown CBD-rich marijuana, so it's a big challenge for them. Now we're going on 17 months of waiting for marijuana study drug. I have an empty safe back in Scottsdale waiting for the study drug to arrive. They keep promising every few months that it'll be there, but at this point, the closest they've been able to get, we've requested a 12% THC, 12% CBD, a 1-to-1 ratio that millions of other growers around the world already have access to, and yet they can't produce that. They just notified us recently that they've got about a 7%, and yet they hold a monopoly through the Controlled Substances Act that says they are required to provide a continuous an uninterrupted, adequate supply of marijuana for scientists. We've already proven over and over again that they have not been able to fulfill scientists' requests for these various specific phenotypes. I would say, more and more proof that this monopoly is incompetent and needs to be ended.
I wanted to take off on that. I mean, I can't match Sue's indignation because she's been in the spotlight for several years now. But what our government has done is shown the failings of the United States of America. I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day and said, "Yeah, we're going to produce our cannabinoids in Canada." Now, I'm sure that Canada has its own warts and problems, but this policy of our federal government is un-American and it's unconstitutional. And I'm not the only one that thinks so. In the Gonzalez versus Raich case, there were 3 dissenters. And you wouldn't think that there would be these 3, Sandra Day O'Connor, Clarence Thomas, and the late William Rehnquist, never confused for being liberals. And recognize that states' rights isn't just for racists anymore. There is no federal allowance for them to control the practice of medicine. The practice of medicine, per the 9th and 10th Amendment to the Constitution and the 1925 Linder versus the United States, has said that medical policy, medical regulations are the purview of the states. And what the federal government has done is they've hijacked this and said, oh no, this is interstate commerce. The people that we are up against here are the oil companies. And if any of you watched the Rachel Maddow documentary on the Iraq War, you know that the oil companies started planning that war before George Bush got the nomination. And it was the petrochemical industries that were responsible for the Marijuana Tax Act. I'm proud to say, and surprised to be saying it, that the American Medical Association testified against the Marijuana Tax Act. I mean, if you take a look at the science, if you take a look at the data, if you take a look at the seriousness of people like Mr. Stanley, Dr. Sicily, all the people up here on the thing, Dr. Sexton and Dr. Felize, we are trying to go at this in a scientific way, and the government and the neo-prohibitionists are, and even our friends like Rand Paul and Cory Booker, who are the co-authors of the CARES Act, are doing their best to throw sand into the machinery, and we need to stand up and say, we're madder than hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, David. I see Jake wants to add a little something to this. Go ahead, man.
This is the reason I'm saying this is an issue that is passionate for me, and maybe after Michelle might have something to say on this as well. I'm also concerned. Sue had mentioned that the federal lab that grows the cannabis in Mississippi is only reporting on 2 chemicals. For those of you, has anyone in here ever smoke I-502 flowers? Good. I'll tell you why, in my opinion. There are over 200 accepted compounds that the state has said these are accepted compounds that can be sprayed and applied to the cannabis plant. There's a list of those, and I one time made the mistake in a form of saying that those were approved compounds. They are not approved. They are accepted, and the state has a disclaimer. If you are buying or purchasing 502 flowers, there is no record in the law requiring a disclosure of what was sprayed on the plants. I did phone one of Seattle's busiest 502 stores, and I won't mention their name, but they were kind enough to talk to me. But one of the chemicals, for example, that we might be inhaling here at Hempfest is a chemical called fluoramite. Fluoramite is an industrial agricultural chemical. It is made for greenhouses, not for residential use and not for personal use. If you pull up the EPA data sheet on it, it says that cancer studies are not required because it is a non-food pesticide. These are going into brownies and they're going into our lungs. Fluoramite, look it up. Also, the EPA is saying that there are no dietary or residential uses. These things aren't even supposed to be sprayed near homes. okay, and we're breathing them into our lungs. No dietary or residential uses, and therefore no studies are required for this. I believe that there might be some violation of the Consumer Protection Act here in the state of Washington. If you're an attorney, that is not my field, but we have a pretty strong law as far as that goes. And I think that anybody making the claims of safety in marijuana for recreational stores, I believe those claims are dubious and not supported by science, because nobody knows what is being sprayed on those. Nobody can tell you what is in those plants. And these are also being used for medicine. Anyway, I'm very passionate about this, obviously. Thanks for listening.
Understandably. Thanks a lot, Jake. Before I turn it over to the audience, because I want to make sure they get access to this amazing panel and the wisdom that's up here, one last question. We've talked about cannabinoids. I wanted to see if anyone had anything to say about the other chemical constituents in the cannabis plant. I don't know what you guys know about terpenes, but terpenes are what give cannabis its smell and its taste, but they have therapeutic applications in and of themselves. And I think a lot more and more research is suggesting that's the real difference between one strain and the next, because if you look at THC, CBD ratios in most commercially available strains, they're almost identical from one to the next. So, yeah, Michelle, do you want to start us out on terpenes?
Thanks, Philippe. What I wanted to say about terpenes, we just had an event,
Could you pull the mic just a little closer to your mouth?
The Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy, where I'm the executive medical director. We just had our first successful fundraiser, which was called the Terp Festival. And thanks to the community for supporting us. We just got our tax-exempt status, and we'll keep doing research and educational events. I also own an analytical facility, and we did a poster. I'm actually going to be presenting this internationally. And the interesting thing is that if you take the whole plant, as you pick it in the field and it's raw, you know, it's rich with a big number of these terpene compounds. The small ones that you smell easily fly off very easily, and they're lost over time. And they're also often being lost in extraction processes, because any kind of heat, so if you make your own at home and you extract it into ethanol and you warm that at all, even if you don't warm it and the alcohol evaporates, you're losing the monoterpenes. So if you like sour diesel, and that's a strain variety you like to smoke, and if you think that you're going to buy it in a cartridge and inhale it as a vapor and you're going to get the same thing, it's not the same thing anymore. Unless you, again, see this list and can see that the ratio of these terpenoids didn't change. So there's really great medical benefit. My favorite terpenoid is pinene. It has the ability to inhibit an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase. And acetylcholine is a marvelous neurotransmitter, and if you experience it, you'll know. So, for instance, pinene is easily lost, and so I think these some of the strains that might be beneficial, for example, for the kids with pediatric epilepsy, the cognitive lift they could get from pinene, they're not getting, because they're getting in an extract that's often been heated and has lost the pinene. So that's just one example.
Thanks a lot, Michelle.
I'd like to.
Joel's got something to add too.
Yeah, you know, on the issue of whole plant botanical, that's one of the words that was thrown out. Botanical. Depending on who you speak with, some people view that word or whole plant or plant-based medicine as voodoo. In our current system, one of the battles we're going to have, no matter what law ends up being passed eventually, whether it's CARES, whether it's something better, hopefully, we have a system that if something works, we automatically assume it's a drug. At one point in time, pharmaceutical companies fought for even vitamin C. And we have these compounds here that, for all practical purposes, some of them may be less toxic than even vitamin C. But because they're so effective for so many things, at least anecdotally at this point, there's going to be this large push to make sure that it's only a drug. And the problem is botanical extracts that are full of these terpenes, various cannabinoids, hundreds of compounds that have this barrage of an effect that's better than the single compound form of them. They don't really make it through that drug approval process, But that's the way that a lot of people are going to try and push this. I think it's very, very important to understand and mention that as important as understanding that there's this entourage effect, and that these plants, whether we evolved alongside them or they were created for us, whatever you believe, it's good science to believe that they match our bodies in whole plant form, and we don't have a system that is adequate to allow this plant to go through the approval process for specific disease states. And that's going to be a problem in the future, and I think you guys know a lot more about that than me, but I just wanted to bring it up.
Excellent. Jake, do you want to add something?
Yes, that's a really good point, and this is something that I want everybody to pay attention to because it is important. The FDA considers single molecule drugs to have a different regulatory class than botanical drugs. I just pulled up on my phone the white paper on it. I have this. If talk to me afterwards, I can text it to you or email it to you. This is a publication from the FDA, and I'll just quote it here real quickly. FDA finds it appropriate to apply regulatory policies that differ from those applied to synthetic, semi-synthetic, or purified chemically modified drugs. And it goes on to say that when there is a discrepancy in the approval process between a botanical drug and a single chemical drug, that if it is a botanical, the FDA is urging them to use the botanical guidelines, and they are much less stringent than those for single molecule drugs for a couple of reasons. One, in general, single molecule drugs are much more toxic than marijuana. So with any kind of a drug, we're looking at a risk-benefit profile. The risk of using cannabis is potentially very low. The benefit is potentially very high. And further, at the end of this document, there's a wonderful flow chart. The FDA even considers it plausible for there not to be any clinical trials for botanicals because of their history of safety. And yes, there are dangerous plants. That's not what I'm saying. But the idea that there is biological plausibility with a plant because of its low toxicity can precede the epidemiology and the studies. So a plant, from a perspective of science, is different than a single molecule drug. Why? Because there are more types of cannabis than there are types of dogs. How are you going to study 150 different things, let alone 500 different things? And our government and the FDA are in concurrence with this. Thank you.
Hang on to that thought, David, because we've only got 5 minutes, and I want to make sure we get some questions from the audience. But maybe you can take the first question. Here you go.
I recently unintentionally produced a set of seeded plants, only to realize on smoking them what we had lost by going to sensimiiforms. Has anybody done any work on the difference between using medicinally and recreationally seeded versus non-seeded plants? I really didn't realize how the high was changed and how familiar it was to me once I used it again.
Well, it keeps you on your toes because the exploding seeds, that's for sure. But
No, I just remember that it was a lot more fun. I'm just remembering that it was a lot more fun when you used to get that weed from Mexico in a bag and you had to take the time to pick out all the stems and the seeds. And it made you laugh. Yeah, that's a great point, and I think it's something we should look at. You should talk to Kevin Jodrey about that.
Kevin Jodrey, she's suggesting you talk to Kevin Jodrey about that. I've got a question over here.
Recently spent some time with a friend who has a 12-year-old daughter diagnosed with brain cancer, inoperable, and she was going on to try cannabis because nothing else was working, and I was going to grow something to help her, and now I'm seeing that maybe that's not possible. I know she would be taking a tincture, and it'd have to be, would I need a machine like this, or could I just buy some seeds and help her? It seems more complicated, so I just wanted.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does seem complicated. If you like to grow, you should go for it, and you can find a way to use it. But there's also a lot of products, out there already.
Yeah, I think my best suggestion would be there are some great producers and products out there. Make sure they're well labeled. Make sure you see a lab test, not just that people tell you it's lab tested, and that it's tested for more than just THC and CBD, particularly if you're using it for therapeutic purposes. I think that's the least we can all expect from our medicine, is that we know that they're safe and we know what's in them. So any more questions for this amazing panel of doctors, researchers, et cetera up here, so we can pick their brain a little bit? Did you have a question? Yeah. Any more questions for this amazing panel, guys? And oh, there's one. Perfect. Thanks.
I think it was Joel that mentioned earlier about how in treatment of CBD that there are certain certain people that to react to don't have positive outcomes from treatments. Do we have any idea what the certain biological triggers that might be?
I think that there are a lot of theories, and fortunately there are a lot of brilliant people looking at it now. I'm not a scientist, not a researcher. All I can tell you is what we've seen and the data we've collected. But now that we're seeing, actual controlled trials, we're going to start getting better data, as Sue said. Objective data. We haven't had this in a long time, so I think we'll understand. What we're going to know about this in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be amazing. But right now, everything is. All that I can tell you is, well, we've seen this, and this or that speculation.
What I'd add to that is after about 20 years of treating people with medical cannabis, there seems to be a large percentage of the population that not only doesn't respond well to cannabinoids, but may not be suitable for cannabis treatment at all. And I think that's interesting. And actually, if our governments would realize that cannabis use is self-limiting, because there may be 35% of the population that don't respond well to cannabinoids at all, that you don't need drug laws to stop that 30% from using.
I'm one of those.
Yeah.
I can't use cannabis. I'm one of those people. You meet them sometimes. Some of you may be.
Yeah.
I'm not just a lightweight. It just doesn't fit me, or it doesn't fit me right now. Something may change in my own brain chemistry in the future where it's of great benefit, but we can't really quantify those things yet.
Thanks, guys. As I'm going to give you guys all 30 seconds to kind of close out the panel. Tell us what you think we should be doing. I always like people to get advice about what we do when we leave this place, how we can change things, move forward, help your projects move forward, help legalization move forward. So what do you guys say in 30 seconds or less? We'll start with Sue.
I would say if you can if you can like our Facebook page, that will give you regular updates on where the study is at and when we're recruiting veterans and how they can be screened. It's the page is just Sue Sicily MD. So if you like that page, or go on maps.org, you can get all the updates and all the information. Our entire protocol is posted there. Also, any energy you can plow into ending the DEA NIDA monopoly so that we can finally license other expert growers in this country to grow marijuana to spec for legitimate research trials like this. We would be most grateful to have you partner with us on this final battle. This is the final obstacle to enable marijuana research to flourish in this country, ending the DEA NIDA monopoly. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks,
Jake?
Sue. Check, can you hear me? Can you hear me back there?
Yep.
Okay. Real quick, as the science progresses, we are going to be able to use this plant more and more. The best strains of cannabis have yet to be created. But remember this, folks, that cannabis for pain, the treatment of cannabis for pain is putative. It is generally known to be true. You just need to try it to find out. There is not every experimental pain paradigm we have looked at cannabis and pain. It's been shown to be effective. Plus, it is the least toxic of any pain reliever in the pharmacopoeia, with the exception maybe of a very few. So not only is it putative for pain, but it is arguably one of the best things for certain patients to use for pain because of its low toxicity. And that's not what is being talked about in the media narrative. It is accepted as useful for pain, and it is the least toxic. So just remember that. It's really, its main benefit from my perspective is its low toxicity. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Michelle, words of wisdom to part with?
Center for the Study of Cannabis and Social Policy. We have a Facebook page. Go like us, and you can keep up with how we're following policy in Washington and now outside the state as well, both medical and recreational use. And all I have to say is keep growing, keep pollinating, keep using cannabis because it is the people's medicine. Let's keep it that way.
That's right. People's Festival, People's Medicine. Thank you, Michelle.
Okay,
David?
I just want to mention my book. I'm going to put some brochures out there. I have one copy each left of Volume 1 and Volume 2. Well, Dr. Arnold Leff, who has a distinguished resume, including having worked in the Nixon administration and Drug Czar's office, says we should eliminate the DEA. And I certainly couldn't agree with that more. We also need to reform the FDA. The FDA is not there, as Dr. Felize pointed out, to validate plants. And when we talk about dangerous plants, tomato plants are dangerous. If you eat the leaves, your kid is going to get sick, and you might even die. So what I guess I would admonish you to do is to recognize that 5,000 years of history is on our side, the science is on our side. I think maybe getting Bernie elected president would be helpful here because he seems to make a lot of sense. So don't just let what you have heard here at Hempfest stay in this room.
That's right.
Spread it around.
All right, thank you very much, David. And Joel, some parting words of wisdom.
You know, the last few years I've seen doors open because of a little girl's story that weren't open for many years. And so if you or someone you know is using cannabis to great effect, please share that with people because it is so powerful. We talk about objective data and trials, and all of this is so important for us to do as a species. But your anecdotal reports are so important and so powerful, and we have to overwhelm this system with those stories. Speak up. Thank you.
Here. All right. Guys, a big hand for these amazing doctors. Thank you guys so much for being up here today, for coming and joining Hempfest. As I said, this is a festival by the people of Seattle, for the people of Seattle. It's amazing to be here again. My name is Philippe Lucas. I'm Vice President of Patient Research and Services for Tilray. I've been a cannabis researcher for the last 10 years, and it's amazing to be here with you today. I come on down from Vancouver Island every summer to spend Saturday at Hempfest with you.